During the final months of World War II, as Allied forces pushed deeper into German territory, they uncovered more than just enemy fortifications and weapons caches. Hidden beneath the earth, in a network of mines that had been sealed for decades, they found something that would haunt the men who discovered it for the rest of their lives. The official reports called it a mining accident. The men who were there knew better. What they heard coming from those shafts, what they found in the deepest chambers, defied every rational explanation. This is the story of the screaming mines and the German files that were supposed to stay buried forever. Before we descend into those depths, I need you to do something for me. If you've been watching these videos without subscribing, now's the time to change that. We're building a community of people who want to hear the stories that don't make it into the history books, the accounts that get filed away and forgotten. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what we're about to discuss is just the beginning. There are more stories like this, more files that were never meant to be opened. And if you make it to the end of this video, I want you to leave a comment telling me what you think really happened down there. Now let's talk about what the Allies found in the spring of 1945. The town of Nordhausen sits in the Harz Mountains of central Germany, a region known for its dense forests and extensive mining operations that date back to the medieval period. By 1945, this area had become something else entirely. The Nazis had transformed the old mining tunnels into underground facilities, using slave labor to construct weapons factories safe from Allied bombing raids. When American troops from the 104th Infantry Division entered Nordhausen in April 1945, they were prepared for what they might find in terms of war crimes and human suffering. The concentration camp at Mittelbau-Dora, connected to the tunnel systems, had already revealed horrors beyond imagination, but there was one section of the mines, sealed off even from the SS guards, that no one was prepared for. Private First Class Daniel Rothman was part of the initial reconnaissance team sent to map the tunnel systems. He kept a detailed journal during his time in Germany, entries that his family donated to a military archive in 1987, decades after his death. In those pages, he describes the first time they approached what the German workers called the Schreienden Schächte, the screaming shafts. It was 3 days after the town's liberation. The main tunnel complex had been secured, and engineers were assessing which sections could be safely entered and which needed to be permanently sealed. Rothman's team was tasked with checking a series of older shafts that appeared on pre-war mining maps but weren't connected to the Nazi weapons facilities. The entrance had been bricked up, but not recently. The mortar was old, dating back possibly to the 1920s or earlier. What struck Rothman immediately was the silence. Throughout the main tunnel complex, you could hear the echo of boots on stone, voices calling out, the sound of equipment being moved. But as they approached this sealed section, all of that seemed to fade away. He describes it as walking into a pocket of absolute quiet, the kind that makes your ears ring. The engineering officer, a lieutenant whose name Rothman never recorded, ordered them to breach the wall. They used pickaxes rather than explosives, not wanting to risk a cave-in. As the bricks came away, Rothman writes that the air that came through was not stale as you'd expect from a sealed space. It was cold, far colder than the surrounding tunnels, and it carried a smell he couldn't quite identify. Not decay, not chemical. Something else, something wrong. They widened the opening enough for a man to pass through and set up portable lights. The shaft beyond descended at a steep angle, the walls showing tool marks that predated modern mining equipment. This was old, possibly centuries old. The lieutenant sent 2 men ahead with lights and rope while the rest waited at the entrance. Rothman was one of those who waited, and he's grateful for that to this day, according to his journal. Because what the advance team found in the first chamber made one of them refuse to ever go back underground again. When they returned, maybe 20 minutes after descending, both men were pale. The younger one, a corporal from Pennsylvania, was shaking. They'd found bodies, but not recent ones. Skeletons, dozens of them, arranged in a circle around a central shaft that dropped even deeper into the earth. The positioning of the remains was what disturbed them most. Every skeleton faced inward toward that central shaft, and every skull showed signs of trauma, fractures that suggested they'd been struck from behind. But the way they'd fallen, or been placed, suggested this wasn't a mass execution in the traditional sense. They were seated, or had been when they died, arranged with precision, and carved into the walls around them were symbols that none of the men recognized, geometric patterns that seemed to spiral down toward the deeper shaft. The lieutenant decided they needed to report this before proceeding. They sealed the breach temporarily and returned to the surface. But that night, while the discovery was being discussed at the battalion command post, something happened that changed everything. The guards posted at the tunnel entrance reported hearing sounds coming from deep within the sealed section, screaming. Not the sounds of wounded men or animals in distress. This was something that made even veteran soldiers uncomfortable. It started around 200 hours and continued until just before dawn. The guards described it as multiple voices, impossible to count how many, crying out in unison. Not words, not in any language they recognized, just raw sound, rising and falling in waves. By morning, both guards had requested transfer to different duties. The commander couldn't grant that, not in the middle of a combat zone with work still to be done, but he did rotate them off that particular post. And he authorized a full investigation of the sealed shaft, not because he believed in ghosts or unexplained phenomena, but because he thought there might be trapped survivors from the concentration camp, people the Nazis had hidden away to die in the darkness. A larger team went down the next day. Rothman volunteered to go with them, something he later questioned. They brought more lights, medical supplies in case there were survivors, and weapons because no one knew what they might find. The first chamber was exactly as the advance team had described it, 23 skeletons arranged in a perfect circle, all facing inward. The forensics officer who examined them estimated they'd been dead for at least 50 years, possibly longer. The clothing fragments that remained suggested turn-of-the-century German workers, mining gear from before the First World War. The symbols on the walls were photographed and sketched, but no one could identify them. They weren't occult symbols in the traditional sense, nothing from any known religious or mystical tradition. They were something else, something older perhaps, or something invented for a purpose the men couldn't fathom. The central shaft dropped another 100 feet, and the team could see that it had been deliberately carved, not following any natural cave formation. Someone had wanted to go down there, wanted to reach something specific. They set up a rope and pulley system, and 2 volunteers descended while the others maintained position in the upper chamber. Rothman stayed above, and his journal entry about what happened next is chaotic, the handwriting rushed and hard to read. The 2 men reached the bottom of the shaft and reported finding another chamber, larger than the first. They were silent for several minutes, and when they called up again, one of them was crying. They'd found more remains, but not arranged like the first group. These were scattered, torn apart, the bones showing signs of being broken while the victims were still alive. And in the center of the chamber was a door. Not a wooden door or a metal hatch. The men described it as stone, carved with the same symbols that covered the walls above, but these seemed to move in the light. Rothman writes that he thought they were joking at first, trying to scare the others, but their voices didn't sound like men playing a prank. They sounded terrified. The lieutenant ordered them to photograph the door, but not to touch it. As they were taking pictures, the screaming started again, not from deep below or far away, from right there in the chamber with them. The 2 men barely made it back up the shaft, climbing hand over hand, forgetting the pulley system entirely. When they emerged into the upper chamber, both were bleeding from their ears and noses. The medic couldn't explain it. There was no physical trauma, no sign of blast injury or pressure change, but the bleeding wouldn't stop completely for almost an hour. The team evacuated the shaft immediately. The lieutenant sealed it himself, not just with bricks, but with concrete and steel reinforcement. He filed a report recommending the entire section be permanently closed and marked as structurally unsound. That should have been the end of it. But the sounds didn't stop. For 3 more nights, anyone posted near that section of the tunnels reported hearing the screaming. It got worse each night, lasting longer, growing louder. On the 4th night, Command decided to bring in someone who might understand what they were dealing with. They found a local priest who'd remained in the area, an elderly man who'd served the mining community for over 40 years. His name was Father Klaus Bergman, and he knew the history of those mines better than anyone alive. Father Bergman told them about the dig that took place in 1903. A group of miners, led by a man named Wilhelm Brenner, had discovered something while expanding the existing tunnels. Old shafts, much older than the mines themselves, that seemed to lead down toward a natural cave system. Brenner became obsessed with exploring deeper. He claimed to have found ancient texts in a monastery archive that spoke of something buried beneath the mountains, something from before the coming of Christianity to Germany. He convinced 23 men to join him in a final expedition, telling them they would find wealth beyond measure, artifacts that would make them all rich. They descended with equipment and supplies meant to last a week. They never came back up. The mining company sealed the shafts, and the families were told it was a cave-in, that the bodies couldn't be recovered. But Father Bergman had heard the stories passed down through the community. Some of the older miners claimed you could hear the lost men screaming at night, especially on certain dates. The company dismissed it as superstition and grief. They built the brick wall and forbade anyone from going near that section. Over the years, the sounds became less frequent, then stopped entirely. People assumed the spirits had found rest, or that it had all been imagination from the start, until the Americans broke through the wall and went down into the dark again. Father Bergman asked the lieutenant if they'd gone all the way down, if they'd reached the door. When told that they had, he closed his eyes and began to pray in Latin. He told them that Brenner's journals, the ones he'd found in the monastery, spoke of an older name for the mountains, a name that translated roughly to the threshold, a place where the boundary between the world above and something below was thin. The texts claimed that ancient priests had sealed something down there, had carved warnings into stone and performed rituals to keep it contained. Brenner didn't believe in ancient evil or spiritual danger. He thought the stories were meant to hide treasure or archaeological value. He was wrong. The lieutenant asked what Bergman thought should be done. The priest said the seal needed to be restored, but properly this time. Not just concrete and steel, but with the old protections, the ones Brenner had broken when he breached the final door. He would need time and certain materials, things that might be difficult to obtain in a war-torn country. The commander made a decision that wasn't in any military handbook. He gave Bergman access to the shaft and whatever resources he needed. For 2 days and nights, the priest worked in those tunnels, alone except for one guard posted at the entrance. None of the men who were there ever spoke publicly about what he did down there. Rothman's journal mentions only that strange smells drifted up from below, incense mixed with something acrid, and that the temperature near the shaft entrance fluctuated wildly, hot and cold in waves. On the 3rd morning, Father Bergman emerged and told them it was done. The screaming stopped that night. It never came back, not while American forces held the area. When the occupation zones were established and the region fell under Soviet control, all records of the incident were confiscated. The Soviet officers sealed the entire tunnel complex, not just the shaft, and posted guards with orders to shoot anyone who attempted entry. They maintained that perimeter for years. Some of the American soldiers tried to follow up on what happened, to find out if there had been any further incidents. None of them could get clear answers. Rothman's journal ends with an entry dated June 1945, just before his unit shipped out. He writes that he's tried to rationalize what happened, to find an explanation that fits with everything he knows about the world. Gas pockets in the mines, infrasound causing hallucinations, mass hysteria brought on by the horrors they'd witnessed in the concentration camps. None of it fits. The sounds were real. The bones were real. The door at the bottom of the shaft was real. And whatever Brenner found down there, whatever the ancient texts warned about, he believes it's still there, waiting, listening for the day when someone else decides to dig too deep. The German files that documented all of this, the reports filed by the American command, the photographs taken in the chambers, the sketches of the symbols, most of them disappeared into classified archives. Some surfaced decades later, heavily redacted, released under Freedom of Information requests that took years to process. But there's one photograph that made it out intact. It shows the stone door at the bottom of the final shaft. The symbols covering its surface are clear enough to see in detail, and if you look carefully at the bottom corner of the photo, you can see something else. Scratch marks on the stone floor, leading away from the door. Fresh ones. Made after Brenner's team died. Made by something that wasn't human. I want to hear what you think about this. Do you believe there are places we shouldn't dig, depths we shouldn't explore? Or do you think there's a rational explanation that accounts for everything these men experienced? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story compelling, disturbing, or if it's going to keep you up tonight, wondering what's still down there in those sealed mines, then hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. There are more stories like this, more incidents that got buried in classified files or dismissed as wartime hysteria. Next time, we're going to talk about what Soviet soldiers found in the forests east of Berlin and why an entire regiment was withdrawn from the front lines and sent to a psychiatric facility. You won't want to miss that one. Until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember that not everything that got buried in the war was meant to stay dead.